I'm wrestling of Common for YouTube. Joined by my buddy Patrick McCray and my buddy Gordon Dymowski. We're here to discuss episode 461 of Dark Shadows, picked by Patrick McCray. So, Patrick, why did you pick this episode, buddy?
I think because it brings out the natural luster of the wood. I picked out this episode because it is really a reboot for the series. When I was writing for one thing, the daybook piece that I wrote about it was written about 2 years and a Rondo nomination into my writing of the daybook. However, it was the first time that my editor said, okay, yeah, this is what I wanted. Seriously, Wallace had this very firm vision for the daybook, and he kept sort of describing it to me, and I just kept like, what? Okay, okay. And I kept sort of writing around it. And eventually, with that one, I thee wed. And Wallace wrote back, and he said, okay, yeah, that's what I wanted. So, because that was the way, he liked it, I kept going. But also, it was an opportunity that the show gave me to really focus on what he was interested in. Big, blousy babes. But beyond that, it also gave us an opportunity to focus on both the arc of the story and the arc of the story of the production. I was able to address both things. In the arc of the story, it is existing in a universe where both the audience and the cast of characters, or some of them at least, really know about the past of Barnabas. And Barnabas is allowed to not be a villain. And so they are transitioning him into a completely new role on the show. And basically, everything about Dark Shadows is about to change. It's about to become the Dark Shadows I love, and certain people don't. And that's okay. You know, it's America. But where Barnabas is the hero. And so from a production point of view, I mean, from the point of view of the characters, like Vicky and so on, she's about to go, I think, someplace far further than 1795. And that is, she's about to be her own character who exists independent of Colin Hoyt. And independent of Burt Devlin, and independent of all those things. You know, she's all about, I mean, she fails the Bechdel test in a big way, but who cares? She's all about Peter Bradford. And what does that mean? It means she's all about the identity that she established in 1795. So those things are important. And then, again, from the production point of view, they are getting ready for a decidedly different Dark Shadows series. So it is, in a lot of ways, as we mentioned twice now, I think, it's the second pilot for the show. And it's really interesting because the writers do a marvelous job. They don't just go, wham, okay, new show, new rules, who cares? Instead, and they set this up before 1795 happened, they very subtly introduce element by element by element. Starting here, where we find out that Joy is a doctor, or where the Collinses find out that Joy is a doctor, they introduce a world where the rules are very different.
Gordon, what do you think?
I think this is a really good example of how to hand off a show from one character to another. Because, I mean, it starts with that whole introductory sequence with the Nancy Barrett narration. And it's not just stock shot, narration, jump in. She's narrating the action throughout as Victoria's about to be hung. And I'm curious to find out whether there had been like some preemptions, or if they just said, hey, we need to take a little extra time. Because it does feel like it's two.
I think. Because I think you also had a lot of people who had heard about the show. They did not want to come in the middle of a storyline. So this was a perfect time to jump back in.
Right. So I kind of feel like it was set to deliberately set up to, okay, like you could easily see if the first 460 episodes of Dark Shadows had been wiped and they didn't exist, you could jump in on this and feel like, oh, okay, I know where it's going. And we've had Victoria as our POV character. And they kind of slowly started to, they let other people do the introductory narration. They started to focus less and less on characters around her, because that way it's no longer the story of a woman trying to discover her past with the Collins family. It's about a man dealing with his own supernatural curse in the Collins family. It's about a man trying not to be a monster, even though
That's
he
right.
is one by nature.
What a wonderful way to put it.
And I think that this does a really good job of, there's this really great balance of character. It gives us a payoff to the start of 1795, because we haven't had too many flash forwards in that arc. I don't think we had any in that arc. Like 1897, there are one or two, but
yeah.
But it's so we've got the sense of, okay, even though for Vicky it's X amount of time, at Collinwood it's maybe an hour, if even that.
It's almost nothing. I think it's almost instantaneous.
Mm-hmm.
The trip back to the present day happens pretty fast. After they do the hanging setup, they bring her back. Phyllis Wick is no more. She's gone. Roger's questioning where Phyllis Wick goes.
Yeah, but keep in mind I think Roger or Barnabas actually points it out in the episode. A minute of Collinwood 1967 time could be months to a year, because we follow Victoria throughout 1795. There's been no flash forward, so we don't know if we assume that like TV time is concurrent with real time in 1795. You know, the fact that she bounces back not so many weeks afterward, but back into within seconds. That's the thing that's incredible. Because, and I think Dark Shadows is also starting to play with the idea that, Collinwood is not in the real world. Like when you look at the first, when you look at up until 212, you could argue that Dark Shadows tried to take a realistic approach to Gothic horror. Like even though you've got Bill Malloy, even though you've got the Phoenix thing, you could do a little bit of, you could somehow base it in reality. Bill Malloy is just a hallucination. Laura is just a pyromaniac with really bad mothering skills. But here, Dark Shadows is planting a flag and saying, no, this is where we are. We are not in the real world.
Yeah, it's well put. And really, with the exception of the widows, and who cares? Because they're they kind of like, they move books and things, and they make noise at night, but that's about it. They hang out at the old house. There's not a lot of weirdness that comes home into Collinwood proper. And you're about to have Angelique there. You're about to have Nicholas Blair there. You're eventually about to have Quentin there. Adam's going to live there. I mean, at a certain point, the forces of the supernatural are going to outnumber the humans.
Yeah, it's going to be like the Playboy Mansion, except with a lot of red candles.
I don't view this like as a reboot. I just view this as a continuation to what they were always doing. And to me, for this, by the way, regular time was frozen. And I think the reason she goes back in seconds is because they're sort of lining up the exact time that she left, because it's still dark, because Barnabas is there at the seance, because again, time's frozen. Time isn't moving forward because it's frozen in regular time.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, let me maybe counter the. I know you don't think this is a reboot, but let me maybe make a metaphor or a simile or whatever those are. I'm gonna compare it to Doctor Who, especially the classic era. Doctor Who, you could when you look at, because it had different showrunners throughout the years, you could look at particular showrunners and look at what their particular style was, what their particular thematic concerns were, and also what their approach was. So you start with the first 3 years are basically, we're time travel, we're a family show, we're educational. You learn about history by going to the past. You learn about science by going to the future, and you go sideways because you're stoned out of your mind. And then for a while, it became, and this would be around the time that Dark Shadows was starting, and up until like 69, it was Base Under Siege, where you have a specific number of sets, you have a creature that comes outside, and you have a cast that's trying to deal with the problem. Then it goes into more invasion, spy, army stuff. And then with Tom Baker, then in the middle of that, you get into basically Dark Shadows style pastiches of horror novels. So but you look at that and you can see Dark Shadows, even with each storyline, is an approach, an idea, and a way moving forward. So the first 211 episodes are, we're going to make Gothic horror with a realistic bent. We're going to do it. We're not going to do ghosts and spirits. And when they finally do, there's like, okay, you can kind of go, okay, maybe that's real, maybe that's not. Then when you get to the Barnabas section, the first, and that kind of first up until you go into color, I'd say the first third are very much you could tell somebody was reading I Am Legend, because they base a lot of that initial arc on who's the vampire, what's going on. And it's a very realistic approach. Because when they bring Hoffman in, she's talking about how there are these cells. When she tries to secure them, he's like, it's a magical affliction, but there's at least a nod of science.
It's midichlorians.
Yeah, they're midichlorians.
Now,
and she was also giving him penicillin because, when you're from 1795, you don't know what you got.
Angelique is one word.
Right.
Now, one thing, I was going to make a very tasteless joke, and for once I won't.
Okay, and then you've got the Maggie storyline, and then you've got 1795. The series goes into color, and they take advantage of that. Yeah, they do it in the same way that Star Trek did at the same year, which is, let's be colorful, let's not just do drab. So by this time, the show is thinking, okay, what's the change? And the change is, we've been realistically bound. We kind of went into supernatural stuff in 1795. Here's where they plant the flag and say, we're still the same show. We're just thinking about it differently.
Well, the supernatural becomes the rule rather than the exception.
Right.
It's not a potboiler kind of soap opera where they introduce a supernatural element now and then. Mm-hmm. It's a supernatural show where the supernatural characters get involved with potboiler type elements.
Yeah, it's not a soap opera with supernatural elements. It's a supernatural drama with soap opera elements.
Yes, exactly.
I would say the show's been that for some time, though.
But here's the thing. It's easy to see all of the episodes as each one is the same thing. It's easy to see it as, and you weigh them all the same. It's okay to acknowledge that sometimes shows change. It's, let me give you a viewing recommendation. Chaos on the Bridge. It's a documentary. It's on Tubi. It's about the first 2 years of Star Trek: The Next Generation. That show nearly imploded because you had one set of writers who are like just trying to figure out what's going on. Then you get Manny Hurley, who's from The Equalizer and Miami Vice and all these other shows, Maury Hurley.
Morris Hurley, yeah.
And his attitude is, hey, I don't care about these actors. We just need to get the show on the road. And he did. And he did. But you also, it is okay. Like it's not criticizing that you like it, but you have to keep in mind, every television show is dynamic. Every show, and especially since this is roughly year 3 of Dark Shadows. Year 1 is the black and white era, where they're just trying to figure out. They're trying to just get viewers, and they're trying to figure out how do we do this.
Air. Yeah.
Year 2 is roughly the Barnabas arc. I would say it was roughly the Barnabas arc, including 1795, because you're setting up. Okay, this is going to be our main villain. The writers expect to just stake him after 13 weeks. I've been thinking that had they hired somebody else to play Barnabas, that's probably would have happened. And we'd all be talking about that goofy, campy, bad soap opera that jumped the shark by introducing a vampire.
This episode, just so you know, was aired 1 year less a couple of weeks to when Barnabas was introduced.
Right.
So we are almost at the 1 year mark. Not only that, it was written by Sam Hall, who was not one of the writers who brought, introduced Barnabas and so on. And so I really see this as Sam putting his mark on the show. And I see Sam's biggest influence as being Matthew. From the stuff Matthew was watching. Matthew was watching a lot. I'm guessing from what he's written and just getting a feel for the guy and how old he was and what was in pop culture at the time, that Matthew was probably watching a lot of fantasy TV, which was very rich at this point. A lot of Irwin Allen and, Man from U.N.C.L.E. and Wild Wild West and things like that, The Invaders. And I suspect he was reading a lot of Marvel comics. And so those are all really interesting elements. And Sam is going to be layering them in more and more, because really, even if you look at 1795, which is supernatural as hell.
Mm-hmm. And
it's also supernatural as hell, really coloring within certain lines. You don't have Diabolos. You don't have, hey, let's cut off Roger Davis's face and put it on somebody else. You don't have Nicholas Blair. You don't have the wilder element. You don't have a werewolf also running around and all this other stuff. And Sam is like, yeah, bring it on.
Yeah. And the thing to keep in mind is it's okay to start looking at this on a deeper level. It's whenever, and that, just because we find different things in it and because there is a change is good. It's like, and it's also okay to, we've touched on this before, like, if there's a particular episode of Dark Shadows that is not enjoyable, like I'll throw out 1102. Looking back, I probably should have chosen a different episode, not because it was bad, but because it was dark and bleak, and it might not have been an ideal choice. It's not bad. It's just
a very graduate school choice, though.
Right. It is a very graduate school choice. But I do think here, like, year 2 is Barnabas, including his secret origin, because that's what 1795 is. You see where he comes from. And now the show is kind of saying it's not giving out any information other than, okay, this girl is going to be Victoria. We've been with her, but now it's Barnabas's show, because all the action revolves around Barnabas. What does he know? And when he tries to attack Vicky, Hoffman says, nope, you're not seeing her, though. Go. I'll meet you in your room later. We're going to be bed buds, Barney, okay, whether you like it or not.
And they really do become friends. I mean, Angelique is the major thing that galvanizes them as a unit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, her and Nicholas, the arrival of Nicholas as well is another sticking point who comes and helps Angelique, but you find out he has his own motives too. Is interesting. Here's why I don't view this is a reboot. I've watched a reboot happen in another franchise I love. It's called the Halloween franchise. Now, Halloween H2O does a very interesting thing. It doesn't acknowledge Halloween 4 or any character from it. It doesn't acknowledge Halloween 5 or any character from it. And it doesn't acknowledge Halloween 6 or the Cult of Thorn. Halloween H2O takes 3 specific characters from the first 2 movies. Laurie Strode, a.k.a. Carrie Tate. Michael Audrey Myers. Loomis is mentioned in it, but again, Donald Pleasance had passed away in 95. But they do mention Loomis, and they bring one more familiar character back, and it's Merrington Whittington from Halloween 1 and 2. The nurse who was in the car with Loomis, and who later saw him later in Halloween 2, the Marshal. That's a reboot. They're taking no character from 4 is mentioned. No character from 5 is mentioned. No characters is 6 from 6 is mentioned. And you have a slasher story, in a sense, set in California, filmed in California, at a posh school, with Dark Shadows taking a character like Barnabas, with the way Frid played him and the way the writers wrote him, because they weren't sure where they were taking him. Taking the character and where you could say he was a heel and they're making him a baby face isn't rebooting the show or even the character. The wrestling logic is this: the bigger the heel, the bigger the baby face. The bigger the baby face, the bigger the heel, or vice versa. You have a character who's been this heel, and now he's going to be your biggest baby face, because after you've watched 1795, you cannot keep this character heel no longer. After watching everything he went through, it's not just what Victoria Winters goes through. Yes, she goes through some stuff too, but he went through so much stuff in 1795, losing it, the way he lost his sister, the way he lost his mother, the way he lost his bride, the way he lost his uncle. You know how that was done, and it was done because of another character named Angelique. You feel sorry for Barnabas. When Barnabas bites Victoria, it's not a "oh, he's evil" moment. You get why he does it. He's now, in every way, he's in survival mode. I need to survive because I need to get out of here. He wants to leave, and when they go to leave, I know that's, I'm sort of jumping an episode. So when they go to leave, and they run to Jeff Black.
Literally,
I needed to break up the, I wanted to see if you were paying attention.
Don't let Barnabas tell you how to drive, and for God's sakes, don't let Victoria Winters drive you anywhere.
It's true, Joel. I've done a little bit of research here.
Yeah.
And I think this may assuage you, because we are now experiencing that trademark Jules saying wrath as you viciously abuse us for
and if you keep it up, I will read from this book on the air. The only thing I would ask is Patrick, you leave the room.
What is that? Oh God, James Patterson.
I found it at a little free library, so I did not spend any money on this.
You paid the right price.
That's free is the best price for anything, James Patterson.
According to the free dictionary online, which is the only reliable dictionary out there, it's the first thing that Google coughed up. This is, okay, there's a certain term for this. And I'm going to read the definition first. A film, TV show, or other media franchise that follows up an earlier installment in the series and features some of the same elements, but which also serves as a new beginning point for the franchise as a whole. It is often intended to update or reinvigorate certain aspects of the series, such as characters, tone, or aesthetic for modern audiences. And, it's not a hard reboot, it's a soft reboot. And that's that this is a soft reboot.
And let me further that argument by stating, when you look at any show, you're looking at both what's being created on screen and the production stuff.
Yeah.
You see where, as Patrick explained earlier, it's where the two meet. With Barnabas Collins, it wasn't just he was a villain and they decided to make him a hero. The audience was increasing the more Barnabas was on screen. And it also, with and giving Fred credit, he could have done all that work and the audience hadn't been there after 13 weeks.
There's also another factor that I think we need to concede in all of this, and that is that the show has been on the air long enough now, because it's not like they had the internet back then and could pick up social trends immediately. It took a while to really, really, really ascertain, because they weren't the Nielsen's back then had nothing to do with demographics. It was just numbers. That was the problem with Star Trek, is that they canceled Star Trek, and then they found out that it didn't matter how few people comparatively were watching Star Trek. It had to do with the economic power of the people who were watching it. And it was this all-important male 18 to 49 age range that spent the money. In the case of Dark Shadows, I think they had finally really, really, really gotten past the it's a fluke stage, and they were conceding that our audience is a little younger than we thought, that the crowd who ran home from school was as much, not more of their bread and butter than Housewives, but it certainly was on equal footing. And that, they saw what Dark Shadows was when they tried to just aim the show at Housewives. And now that they absolutely know, nope, it's kids. We cannot do this. We cannot pull this show off without also appealing to that juvenile audience. And this is laying the groundwork for that Dark Shadows.
The thing of it is, if you're going to reboot, if you're really rebooting the show here, if you're really rebooting the show, you know what you're doing with Victoria Winters, right? She's going off into the past, into the sunset, if you will, no matter who plays her at this point. If you're really rebooting the show, which I call BS on, then you never need to mention Victoria Winters again, which they do. They do. They mention Victoria Winters in the Leviathan arc.
She's all over the show. Yeah, okay, I see what you mean. After she goes,
they mention her in 1970 when they returned from 1995 because of the Ghost of Daphne. And for me, like, if that's what I mean by reboots, to me are you take one character who you're now building the show around, and the rest of the characters that came before him mean absolutely dick. You completely wipe the slate clean, and they shouldn't even be there. Does that really happen with Dark Shadows? No, not really. Because you mentioned
Joel, time. There's a difference between a hard reboot and a soft reboot.
This is a soft reboot. On Enterprise, when they introduced the Xindi arc, this long war arc, and then the temporal war in the next season, that was a soft reboot. They kept the characters, they kept the general conceit of the show, but they radically changed the focus of the show. A hard reboot is J.J. Abrams coming in, no, seriously, and literally saying, hey, things are going to look different. History is going to kind of be different. This is essentially sort of the same thing, but it's really not. And it's new cast, new character. Well, this cast is alive. That sort of helps. But, new cast, new characters, or not new characters, but definitely new cast, new look, and really thrusting a needy new direction at the audience.
Yeah, so you're not changing everything. A hard reboot is if at year 3 they said, okay, it's Barnabas. He's a private detective in San Francisco. He's hanging out with Carl Kolchak, and he's
I love that show. I want that show.
Yeah. A soft reboot is what Dark Shadows did in episode 461. It said, okay, we've got the same characters, but the shift is different because we're no longer dealing with the real world or even imagining that it's a realistic. It's like the supernatural. They've said they are all in on the supernatural.
And we know that Barnabas is not. We know that Barnabas is not a monster anymore. We know that he's just a guy who's been in incredibly bad circumstances and has sort of been doing his best.
Right. And if you notice, they do his origin at the end rather than start with 1795. It comes at the end before 461 because the audience was sympathizing with him. And again, had any other actor played it, you wouldn't have 1795. You would have him. You might even have Dr. Hoffman. You would have Barnabas being staked, and then the show would have done something else. Maybe it was a Proto Adam story. It might be a Jekyll and Hyde thing, or it might have gotten canceled.
It would have been Quint the Ghost, because that's where Quentin came from. That's in Shadows on the Wall. Mm-hmm. Is this whole plan for Quint the Ghost.
Okay, so you guys think this is a reboot. That's cool.
No, it's a soft reboot.
It's a soft reboot.
Okay.
It is a very gentle reorientation.
You know what?
Since the thrust of the show.
You know what? You played my hand, Jules. Since you can't give this up, I'm going to start reading aloud from this book.
Oh,
Patrick, run. Okay. Chapter 1, Eastern Russia, 30 years ago. A mother can sense a disturbance in her world, even in her sleep. Did. The late night snowfall made the small village. You forced my hand, Joel. You forced my hand.
Kaufman.
Here's the question for you guys for this episode specifically. Julia getting revealed, outing herself as a doctor. How big is that?
It's huge. It's huge. And the fact that they don't throw her out and call the cops.
Yeah, that one.
This woman's been staying in our house under false pretenses for how long?
And the funny thing is, the thing that she claims is the truth isn't, because she says, I really am writing a book. No, you're not. You're a dirty liar, Julia Hoffman. Shame on you. Shame on you.
She says to Barnabas, I think in the next episode, I've replaced one lie with another. And it's true. It's true. It's like, yeah, you're a doctor, for sure. But you're not writing any book. Where's your book?
She's a doctor who saves Willie Loomis's life and helps take Dave Woodard's. What the hell kind of doctor is it? I don't want her looking after me.
This is how many years before?
I mean, Doctor Who is a better doctor than Julia Hoffman.
This is how many years before Dr. House?
Yeah.
That's what if we could somehow do a digital mashup, we should get Dr. House in with Dark Shadows. Because can you imagine him with Barnabas? He's like, you know what? Stay in your damn coffin. You're an idiot. And what the hell is Julia doing with sedatives? I mean, she's giving out sedatives like they're candy. Shame on you, Julia. You're a pusher. First it's sedatives. It's going to be the marijuana, then the LSD.
The marijuana.
And then she's going to have Carolyn smoking crack by 1970. I swear to God.
Those sedatives were not really, they were prescription, but that's because they were prescribed to her.
Mm-hmm.
Those are Julia's.
I'll tell you what, I really love Nancy Barrett in this episode, too. She seems just as confused and even though she's working for Barnabas and working with him, she's just as confused and conflicted of what's just gone on.
None of what Carolyn is dealing with was in the brochure that she was given at the job interview.
No.
Barnabas really gave her a pretty clear idea of what this job's going to be. And then it immediately, it's essentially pimping Vicky, which is not what she signed up for.
Yeah, it's pretty much, Carolyn. Yeah, I need you to distract Julia so I can get the Victoria. It's like, wait, what?
Her? Yeah, if I were Carolyn, I would say, her. I mean, look at me. Her. Come on, B. David Ford gets it.
Good for David Ford. Good for David Ford.
Not so much good for Nancy, I think, in that period, but good for David Ford.
Yeah, good for David Ford. Good for.
Read Dark Passages. You want some David Ford.
What's your guys' favorite moment from this episode?
Well, I think just the look on Barnabas's face when Victoria is coming back, and he suddenly realizes that she probably knows what he is. Yeah. That's a great moment, and just the fact that he, as a protagonist, is having to deal with a whole new realm of oh shit, that even with the new rules, he didn't think he was going to have to deal with. Just that alone is really cool.
Gordon?
Let's see. Excuse me. I would have to say my favorite scene would have to be like towards the end, the scene where he's trying to have, to bite Vicky, and Hoffman comes in and says, "Nope, you're not seeing it all night," because it shows a slightly. I mean, they're considered right now. They're considered enemies, but there's a kind of weird. It's almost like Hoffman is saying, "You know what? You're less of an enemy now," because she doesn't just like take him out. It's like, no, you're not going to hurt her. You're not going to come in here all night. I think it's the mom in her.
Well, and we have to look at this. This is another reason why I wanted to do this. You have to look at this in the context of what really is one of the last episodes before this, kind of, which is 364.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is now the Julia that has, despite him not wanting it, comforted Barnabas after what Sarah has said. This is all in the context of Sarah's visit to Barnabas. You must be good. And part of what Julia's doing, man, yeah, she still is being bitchy and mean, which is great. But also part of what she's doing is, guiding Barnabas to, it's like, now remember Sarah. And now I know who you really are, which is this wonderfully compassionate big brother who made up little rhymes about morality and things like that. That's who you really are. This, kidnapping Maggie stuff is temporary strange. And yeah, you were in a coffin for 170 something years in agony, under a cross that basically paralyzed you and mocked you. And now you're not there anymore. And let's try to figure out who you're going to be.
There are really two cool scenes I love from this episode. Number one, the fact that they remembered to keep every little injury that Vicky had, from being shot to the rope burn, is just cool. I mean, it's a really nice reminder of what happened in 1795. And I really, really enjoy just Julia telling the whole family, "I'm a doctor," is one of the coolest moments in this episode.
It's a great moment. You're right.
And really, it's a big F you to Barnabas at the same time. Kind of.
Rules are different. I got to save a life, and they're going to wonder what I'm doing with all this medical. Now, I didn't get it all in the Girl Scouts.
That's right. It is. Let's see. Today's Sunday. Are you good? Are you guys good for tomorrow night?
What do you want to talk about?
Well, it's Gordon's turn to pick.
Gordon.
Episode.
Okay, let's see. What do I want to pick? Let's see. I want to give two different episode assignments because I want Jewel to watch episode 100 repeatedly for 5 hours because I'm cruel that way. But no, I'm going to make this really easy. It's obvious, and it's the two of you I think might groan at it, but I think it's something I think we really I'd like to approach it from a particular standpoint, and that is episode 212.
I knew you were going to say 212. Yeah, let's watch 212.
So tomorrow night is 11 p.m. good for you guys?
Yes.
Okay, so 11 p.m. tomorrow night, episode 212 with my buddy Patrick McCray and my buddy Gordon Dymowski. Links to Gordon's Amazon page will be in the description box. Links to where you get the Dark Shadows Day book of Now will be in the description box. You guys have a great night.
Joel, thank you. Be seeing you.
Bye.